Welcome to Quiz Time. I'm your quiz master, Sean, and boy, do I have questions for you. Questions to expand our knowledge base, to see what we've learned, to keep ourselves young and keep those brain synapses functioning correctly. Now, we're talking about the nifty 50s. Good old trivia for fun, as you will note. Now, this could be about anything from the 50s. News, sports, trivia, history, pop culture, entertainment, you name it. All right, here we go. What significant Supreme Court case in 1954 declared segregation in public schools unconstitutional? And that court case was Brown versus Board of Education. What science fiction author published The Illustrated Man in 1951? And that was Ray Bradbury. What was the name of the advertising campaign created by the Advertising Council in 1951 that encouraged Americans to prevent forest fires? Smokey Bear, or Only You Can Prevent Forest Fires. What Broadway musical opened in 1950 featuring the songs Getting to Know You and Shall We Dance? And that was The King and I. What American airline was the first to introduce regular coach and tourist class service in 1952? Who started that silliness? That would be American Airlines. What 1950s film starring James Dean featured the memorable Chicky Run scene with cars racing toward a cliff? And that film was Rebel Without a Cause. Who invented liquid paper, the correction fluid, in 1956? And that would be Bet Nesmith Graham. What significant business innovation did Joseph Woodland and Bernard Silver patent in 1952 that wouldn't become widely used until the 1970s? And that would be the barcode, or UPC code. What broadcasting milestone occurred on September 4, 1951, when President Truman addressed the Japanese Peace Treaty Conference? That milestone was the first transcontinental television broadcast. What popular 1950s television western starred James Arness as Marshal Matt Dillon? And that show was Gunsmoke. What landmark civil rights event began on December 1st, 1955 in Montgomery, Alabama? And that event was the Montgomery bus boycott. What kitchen appliance did Earl Tupper create that became popular through Tupperware parties in the 1950s? The kitchen appliance. And that was plastic storage containers, or Tupperware. What 1950s food innovation by C.A. Swanson and Sons was marketed as a complete meal that could be heated and eaten while watching television? Well, that was the good old-fashioned TV dinner. you can still get them. What car model did Chevrolet introduce in 1953 that would become America's sports car? And that car model was the Corvette. What cultural event occurred in Memphis in December 1955 when Sam Phillips sold a recording contract to RCA Victor? And that was Elvis Presley's contract was sold to RCA. What pharmaceutical product, approved by the FDA in 1957, revolutionized women's reproductive health? And that was the invention of the birth control pill, or Enovid. What famous television quiz show scandal broke in 1958 involving Charles Van Doren? And that scandal was the 21 scandal. Somebody's cheating. What office machine company introduced the first successful photocopier for commercial use in 1959? And that office machine company was Xerox, specifically the Xerox 914. What 1955 film starred James Dean as Cal Trask in an adaptation of a John Steinbeck novel? And that was East of Eden. What innovative highway feature was first implemented in New Jersey in 1954 and revolutionized interstate travel? And that highway feature was the Garden State Parkway Token System, or the first modern toll road. What television show premiered in 1952 featuring George Reeves as a superhero? Yes, able to leap tall buildings in a single bound, it was The Adventures of Superman. What American author published The Old Man and the Sea in 1952? And that author was Ernest Hemingway. What Cold War event in 1957 prompted the U.S. to create NASA and invest heavily in science education? That Cold War event was the Sputnik launch. What 1950s dance craze was popularized by Bill Haley and his Comets and featured in the movie Rock Around the Clock? And that dance craze was the rock and roll dance, or the Lindy Hop. What fashion designer introduced the sack dress, or chemise, in 1957, which eliminated the waistline entirely? That was Cristobal Balenciaga. What architectural style, characterized by large glass windows and open floor plans, became popular for suburban homes in the 1950s? And the style was ranch style. What controversial novel by Jack Kerouac, published in 1957, became the defining work of the Beat Generation? And that novel was On the Road. What 1959 Broadway musical featured the songs Tonight and America and was inspired by Shakespeare's Romeo and Juliet? It was West Side Story. What 1955 film, directed by Alfred Hitchcock, featured Grace Kelly and Ray Milland in a story about a failed murder plot? And that film was To Catch a Thief. What brand introduced the first aerosol shaving cream in 1950? The brand that first produced aerosol shaving cans was Rise, or Carter Wallace Rise. What newspaper comic strip featuring a philosophical young boy and a stuffed tiger debuted in 1950? In 1950, Peanuts. What was the name of the first American nuclear submarine launched in 1954? And that would be the USS Nautilus. What popular restaurant chain, known for its 28 flavors of ice cream, was founded by Howard Johnson and expanded rapidly in the 1950s? Howard Johnson's. What 1950s fashion accessory for women was often decorated with poodle appliques? And that accessory was the poodle skirt. What famous children's television program featuring puppets debuted on PBS in 1955? Were they puppets? Or were they... Oh no, that was Captain Kangaroo. Yes, very popular. What fast food restaurant chain, known for its Insta-broiler, was founded in 1953 in Jacksonville, Florida? And now I'm thinking about Mr. Green Jeans. Anyway, the answer to this question is Burger King. Originally, it was called Insta-Burger King. What Hollywood actress married Prince Rainier III of Monaco in 1956? And that would be Grace Kelly. What revolutionary synthetic fabric was introduced by DuPont in 1959? And that would be spandex, or lycra. What significant structure began construction in 1954 to connect Michigan's upper and lower peninsulas? It's just shy of 5 miles long. I've walked it every year for 30 years. It's the Mackinac Bridge. What department store chain introduced the first credit card with a revolving credit line in 1958? And that would be Bank Americard. Later it became Visa. What American folk singer released his debut album, Song for John Doe, in 1951? And that would be Pete Seeger. What television personality hosted Person to Person, interviewing celebrities in their homes from 1953 to 1959? And that was Edward R. Murrow. What influential book by Dr. Benjamin Spock, first published in 1946, became the definitive child care guide for 1950s parents? It was Baby and Child Care. What automobile safety innovation was invented by Volvo engineer Niels Bohlin in 1959? And that was the three-point seat belt. What American painter became famous in the 1950s for his drip painting technique? And the American painter was Jackson Pollock. What was the name of the first commercially successful home video recording system introduced by Ampex in 1956? And that system was the quadruplex videotape. What fast food chain, founded in 1958 in Wichita, Kansas, was named after its founder's young daughter? Pizza Hut? No, that was Wendy's. What American female pilot disappeared in 1950 during a round-the-world flight? And that pilot was Marie Blank Fletcher. What was the first animated feature film released by Disney in the 1950s? The first animated feature film. That was Cinderella. What medical innovation, tested on 1.8 million children in 1954, was declared safe, effective, and potent in 1955? That would be the Salk's polio vaccine. Thank God for it. What toy, consisting of a narrow 6-foot-long flexible plastic track, was patented by Richard James in 1946, but became a massive hit in the 1950s? The Slinky. What television show, premiering in 1952, featured Milton Berle and was NBC's first big hit? And that show was the Texaco Star Theater. What famous musical instrument did Leo Fender introduce in 1951 that would revolutionize rock music? And that would be the Fender Precision Bass. What type of skirt, characterized by a tight-fitting, narrow cut that tapered toward the hem, became fashionable in the mid-1950s? And that was the pencil skirt. What American novelist published Invisible Man in 1952? The novel The Invisible Man was published by Ralph Ellison. What American company introduced frozen TV dinners in 1954? And that company was Swanson. What was the first successful video game created in 1958 at Brookhaven National Laboratory? And that would be Tennis for Two. What term was coined to describe the generation born during the post-World War II baby boom? Baby boom. Baby boomers. What milestone in television technology was reached when NBC broadcast a Tournament of Roses parade on January 1st, 1954? That milestone was the first coast-to-coast color television broadcast. What car model did Ford introduce in 1955 to compete with Chevrolet's Corvette? And that year, Ford introduced the Thunderbird. What breakfast cereal, introduced in 1954, featured a cartoon tiger as its mascot? And that would be Frosted Flakes. They're great! What significant Cold War-related wall began construction in 1952 to prevent defectors? And that wall was the inner German border, the predecessor to the Berlin Wall. What iconic American play by Tennessee Williams premiered in 1955, featuring the character Big Daddy? And that play was Cat on a Hot Tin Roof. What home entertainment innovation did RCA introduce in 1954 that significantly improved audio quality? And that home entertainment system was the first commercial transistor radio. What 1950s interior design trend featuring kidney-shaped coffee tables and boomerang patterns? That interior design trend was the atomic age design. What was the name of the FBI program initiated in 1956 to disrupt domestic political organizations? And that program was COINTELPRO, the counterintelligence program. What household cleaning product, introduced by Procter & Gamble in 1958, was marketed as a miracle in a bottle? And that was Mr. Clean. What television program, debuting in 1952, featuring Betty Furness demonstrating Westinghouse appliances? And that was See It Now. What political term was coined in 1956 to describe young voters' attraction to Dwight Eisenhower? And that term was, I like Ike. What toy company introduced plastic model car kits in 1950 that became hugely popular with American boys? And that was Revell. What American songwriter wrote Your Cheatin' Heart shortly before his death in 1953? Your cheating heart. That was Hank Williams Sr. What technological innovation did IBM introduce in 1956 that revolutionized data storage? And that was Ramac, the first hard disk drive. What American author wrote Fahrenheit 451, published in 1953? And Fahrenheit 451 was written by Ray Bradbury. What famous jazz musician recorded Kind of Blue in 1959? Kind of Blue, that was recorded by Miles Davis. What automobile safety feature was first offered as an option by Nash Motors in 1952? And that safety feature was seat belts. What term described the artificial island built in San Francisco Bay in 1939, but used primarily in the 1950s for naval testing? And that would be Treasure Island. What popular children's television show, premiering in 1955 with the song It's Howdy Doody Time? Well, of course, that show was Howdy Doody. What clothing retailer, founded in 1957, became famous for its casual wear and eventually its khaki pants? That retailer was Gap. What Major League Baseball team moved from Brooklyn to Los Angeles after the 1957 season? And that baseball team was the Brooklyn, now the LA Dodgers. What influential rock and roll DJ, known as Moondog, helped popularize the genre in the 1950s? The Moondog, that was Alan Freed. What American physicist won the Nobel Prize in 1956 for inventing the transistor? And that physicist was William Shockley, who shared it with John Bardeen and Walter Brattain. What construction project, completed in 1956, connected Michigan's upper and lower peninsulas? That project was the Mackinac Bridge. What American singer had his first hit with Shake, Rattle, and Roll in 1954? And that singer was Bill Haley. What U.S. territory became the 49th state in 1959? Which one is the 49th American state? That would be Alaska. What space age-inspired furniture design, featuring a single leg and a molded fiberglass seat, was created by Eero Saarinen in 1956? That would be the tulip chair. What television programming block, introduced by ABC in 1957, featured animated shows on Saturday mornings? And that block was called the Saturday Morning Cartoons, and I never missed it. What American company introduced the first mass-produced transistor radio in 1954? And the American company that first put radios in cars was Regency, specifically the TR1. What sporting event was first televised in color in 1955? The first one to be televised live and in color, the Davis Cup tennis matches. What popular kitchen appliance was introduced by Tappan in 1955 as the electronic range? That would be the microwave oven. What 1956 legislation funded the largest public works project in American history at that time? And that public works project was the Federal Aid Highway Act, or the National Interstate and Defense Highways Fund. What automobile styling feature prominent on 1950s cars was inspired by jet aircraft? That would be the tail fins. What cultural phenomenon began in 1958 when Wham-O purchased the rights to a flying plastic disc? And that began the cultural phenomenon of playing frisbee. What type of restaurant featuring car hop service reached peak popularity in the 1950s? And that restaurant that reached peak popularity was the drive-in restaurant. What American sculptor became known for his mobiles during the 1950s? And that American sculptor was Alexander Calder. What significant environmental disaster occurred in December 1952 and helped prompt the Clean Air Act? And that disaster was the Great Smog of London. What cosmetics entrepreneur launched her beauty counselor home sales program in the early 1950s? And that cosmetics entrepreneur was Mary Kay Ash. What Major League Baseball player retired in 1951 after playing his entire career with the New York Yankees? And that would be Joe DiMaggio. What revolutionary computer programming language was developed by IBM in 1957? And that computer language was Fortran. What 1950s hairstyle for men featured short sides with slightly longer, usually wavy hair on the top? Can't do it. The pompadour, or the Elvis cut. What U.S. territory became the 50th state in August 1959? Who was the last one in? That would be Hawaii. And that's it. You've done an amazing job. Don't forget to like, subscribe, ring that notification bell, and share your score down in the comments, please. Also, check out these videos too. They were a lot of fun to make. They're a lot of fun to play. I'll catch you in the next one. Bye-bye.